Hey, welcome to the Science of Parenting podcast, where we connect you with research based information that fits your family. We'll talk about the realities of being a parent and how research can help guide our parenting decisions. I'm Mackenzie Johnson, parent of two littles with their own quirks, and I'm a parenting educator.
And I'm Lori Cordles, parent of three in two different
Ooh,
life stages.
weird.
Two are launched, and one is in high school. And I am a parenting educator. And this season, we are continuing to talk about children in different stages and ages of life. And specifically, this week, we are talking about the teenagers.
Yep, those teens, those
Mhm.
adolescents. Oh, so much good stuff.
I've had
Well,
three.
yeah,
Have had, and currently have had. How about that? Currently having?
that definitely made sense to me.
Yeah.
But yeah, this season talking all about kids at different ages and looking at the research and the reality around parenting teens. And we're going to talk about these developmental milestones or things that kids are just commonly going through in the teen years. And it's important to understand we're going to be talking about the general expectations of development. We're not getting too far into that nitty gritty, but we do know that every kid develops at their own pace. And in the teen years, I tend to think of like your early bloomers and your late bloomers, right? That's the term we tend to use in the teen years, but all at their own pace. Some early, some kind of right on time, and some a little later. And so, our role today, right? General information and just that it's research based information that you can trust. And it's going to help guide and inform our decisions with our teens.
Exactly. And remember that there are many factors that affect the rate of development in children. And one of those things is temperament. We talked about it all of season 3. And, that can continue to play into children's development and decision making in their teen years. Additionally, their environment, their genetics, and so much more. And if you do have concerns about your child's development or their behavioral or mental health during these teen years, we really recommend that you talk with your family healthcare provider or a local area education agency or even a mental health specialist.
Totally. And
But
I would say we do know, right, that these years there can be different kinds of concerns. And we always say we provide information, and that's just one
we
step.
do.
And it's good to seek out local support when you have it available to you for sure.
So let's talk about the definitions of this particular age group. So we're talking specifically about the ages of 15 to 18, according to the CDC. And, they kind of break it down to like mid teens, 14 to 16, and late teens of 17 to 18.
Yep. And just like we've said every single week, there is kind of this debate, right, about whether it's about the years old they are or whether it's about
Mhm.
milestones. And, we talked about last episode in the preteen years, which I mean, even Lori and I were like, well, what would you say is preteen? What years would you say? There's
Yes.
just like, it's kind of open ended, it's flexible. But there is some really interesting information about when the teen years end.
Mhm.
But again, we're going to talk about it next week when we talk about parenting young adults. But just know
Next week.
that these are not hard and fast. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yep. So I do want to know, as we've said before, I am a parent of like a preschooler and or a toddler. I almost said infant, not been an infant for a little while.
Yep.
But you have and have had, as we established,
Yes.
teens. So what do you say, as a parent, what's great about this stage of teenage years? What's tough about adolescence? Like what do you think?
So my two words are independence and questions. So
Mm,
I think it's great that they have more independence. And then the, I wouldn't say scary or difficult thing. There's
mm.
just a lot of questioning that happens during these years. They're questioning their decisions, they're questioning your decisions, you're questioning their decisions, and you're questioning your decisions. And so, just a lot of questions. And if you feel like you are constantly asking questions of them and of yourself, you know what? Welcome to the teen years. I
Yeah.
just think there are lots of questions
Mhm.
along with that independence. So those are my words. Those are
Mm.
mine.
I
Yeah.
love that. Those are good. Like, and yeah, things to look forward to for me and things to like, okay, that like that time will
Yes.
come.
I mean, if you think you're going to have all the answers during by the time they're teenagers, you've got to just stop that thinking right now. You do not need
Wrong.
to set yourself up for that kind of failure. You are going to have just as many questions as you did when they were an infant. And I know they can talk now and tell you things, but you're still just going to have just as many questions. So,
Yes. And I tend to think like, yeah, not as a parent of a teen, but like I'm an older sibling and like just
mhm.
interactions with teenagers. I think the things that come to mind for me is just like it's a different kind of frustration
Oh,
that you experience
yes.
with a teenager than
Yes.
it is like than I experienced with my toddler screaming at my leg like my son did at supper, like while I was trying to make
Yes.
supper last night. It's a
Yes.
different kind of frustration and like but you should know better.
Yes.
And it's like,
Mhm.
well, maybe not,
Yes.
maybe
Mhm.
not. But we'll get into that, right? Let's talk about
We
those
will. All
domains.
right. So the domains, the categories, the milestones, remember these are the things that children most commonly experience across these categories. Like we said before, we're speaking in general terms and leaning on this text by Charlotte Patterson for our episodes. It's great text, super in depth. We are just really hitting the highlights and the overview of each category or domain.
For sure. And so let's start like we have basically every week with this physical domain. And right, this is the stuff we see. And honestly, this is, I think, a lot of what comes to mind for parents is they're like, oh, teen development or adolescence. It's like, oh, puberty, right? Oh,
Yes.
hormones, like the
Yes.
sexual maturing that's happening, the body changes, the hormones like flowing everywhere. And so, yeah, we do tend to think a lot of that physical change, which is happening.
Mhm.
We also tend to see like a growth spurt in this
Mhm.
age, right? Our kids might look less like kids and more like adults.
Yes.
And we know that looks a little different for the different genders. And so, but the other part of this physical development is actually brain development,
Mhm.
which we've been
Yes.
talking about here and there. And like,
We
oh,
have.
comes out to play again in the teen years.
It does. It does. Like the teen years are like 2.0. Everything's bigger now.
Yeah.
Their bodies, their brains, their limbs.
Oh,
Yes.
all of it.
Yeah.
Well, and so one of the things that's really related to their brain development is this idea that they still are developing their prefrontal cortex, which is the
Mhm.
part of the brain that's responsible for things like planning and consequences and
Ugh.
self-regulation. And so it's not there yet.
Mhm.
It's not there yet.
It's not.
It's still developing.
It is. And if you look at the ages we said, 15 to 18, even an 18-year-old still has 7, count it, 7 years left of brain growth,
At least
right?
7.
Yes. So
Yeah.
when you think about that, oh, yeah, there are some things they are just going to do wrong because their
Yes.
brain's not done growing.
Yes,
Yeah,
that prefrontal cortex is a huge part of what's happening in the teen years.
it is.
But the other thing, which you just said 2.0, right? Everything's bigger than it was
Yes.
in the toddler years. Part of that, which I'm turning into you. I'm turning into a brain geek this season.
Yay.
But part of what they talk about is that there's actually stronger neuron reactions to things.
Mhm.
So things that seemed like this was not a big deal to my kid 2 years ago is suddenly huge.
Yes.
And it's literally the way their brain is processing that information,
Mhm.
that it's happening in a more intense or in a stronger way. And then the other thing about brain development, and I love these terms. I remember learning them in my undergrad class on
Mhm.
adolescence, but this idea of there's a new form of egocentric when it comes to teens, which we're like, hey, no, that was like a toddler preschool thing. And then they were doing better. It's like,
Yes.
well,
It comes back around.
yeah.
2.0.
2.0.
Yeah.
And so there's these two terms that I just like think describe adolescence so well, which is good, right? That's why research, has these terms. But one being something called the personal fable. And so
Yes.
this is the idea for a teen, which goes along with that prefrontal cortex, but that like, oh, things that won't happen to me. like this
Yes.
fable of like, it's all gonna work out fine for me. And so,
Mhm.
oh, I won't be the kid who gets hurt, or
Mhm.
it won't happen to me. Like I wouldn't get pregnant, or I wouldn't
Mhm.
fail a class, or all of these things, that this idea of, well, that's not what happens to me. That personal fable is a big one. And then the
Yes.
other one is imaginary audience. And
Ooh.
I think that's so descriptive of exactly what it is, that everyone is watching me. Everyone's
Mhm.
gonna notice if I wear those jeans 2 times. Everyone's gonna
Yes.
notice, that everyone is in the room is paying attention to what's happening with me. And that's a huge
Mhm.
part of one of the other domains of development we're gonna talk about.
Yes.
But that
Everyone
idea of
can
an
see
imaginary
that
audience.
blemish on my forehead,
Yes.
right?
Everyone's staring. Everyone
Uh,
noticed.
mhm.
Yes. Yeah.
Exactly.
So personal fable, imaginary audience are another big one in their brain and physical development.
Love it. So that
Mm.
brings us to cognitive or thinking or intellectual development. So all of those higher level processes that happen that are able to help us solve problems. We can have more abstract or even hypothetical types of thinking. What happens when? How might this play out if? We're also, as teenagers, better able to tune out distractions. I mean, maybe parents have called it selective listening,
Maybe.
but actually, their brain is growing and they're
Mhm.
able to tune out distractions more. It actually almost reaches the adult level. And we all know about how we can absolutely have selective listening as adult, right?
Maybe.
Yeah,
Maybe again.
I plead the fifth on that. So, like you said, they are, prone to that idea of nothing bad will happen to me, or this isn't how my story plays out.
Mhm.
They're also prone to this idea of overgeneralizing or making assumptions of an entire group. So they don't individualize very well. I can think of an example where my teenager might say something like, "Well, all of the boys in this class think this,"
Mm.
and my question back was, "All of the boys?" Or, "All of this grade, they act like
Yes.
this,"
Yes.
And again, my question back is, "All of the juniors and seniors?"
Yes.
So this idea that overgeneralizing to a population, all of the band people, all of the soccer team. So
That's literally what I was thinking. I'm like, the cliques we think about in high
yes.
school, it can actually be created by this mindset of, right? It's a whole group of teenagers all
Mhm.
together in a building,
Yes.
but it's really placing people, lumping their characteristics all together of like, right? Jocks, nerds, it's like one of the old
Right.
standing ones, but this huge variety
Yes.
of everybody who's in blank is this way or shares
Mhm.
this characteristic. And it's something their brain is naturally prone to do. It's sometimes I think we're like, well, who taught you to think like that? Their brain is programmed this way.
Yes, it goes through
Mhm.
these phases, and this is one of them, to get
Yes.
to the next phase, and, they also, during this time, are trying to meet others' expectations, as well as trying to decide what it is that others expect of them. So they
Mhm.
might focus on, "Well, I need to act or say this thing, because then maybe I will be accepted or I belong." Um,
Yes.
brings us right into another domain, which is language. And that comes into where I said, I really like that we can have questions and have conversations because they're able to, based on their language development, hold longer conversations. They're able to talk deeper about specific subjects
Or talk on the phone for 3
or
hours.
talk on the phone, right?
I
Yes.
never did that. I maybe did that.
Yes, maybe. They can
Mm.
understand and utilize a lot of the, you know, quirks of language, we might say, or slang or the Urban Dictionary. I think we were gonna have, Kenzie give us a little test about what does this phrase mean
What does this
based on
acronym stand
yeah,
for?
right?
I'll fail. I'm sorry.
I will fail. I will totally fail. But
Oh.
that brings us right into that social domain.
Absolutely. And we know this is a huge thing that's happening. I feel like I say that like in every domain. Look at this huge domain. This huge domain.
Right?
All of them are huge. But one of the really important things that we think about in the teen years is this idea of their self-concept and their identity.
Mhm.
One, it gets more complex, right? Instead of, as a little kid, it was like, I'm blonde. Like,
Yes.
that's what you know about me.
Yes.
Um, we know it's a lot more complex now,
I have
right?
yellow
Maybe
hair.
yes.
Yes.
Yes. Maybe it's things, about what things we think we're good at or that we're
Mhm.
not as good at or personality characteristics or,
Mhm.
those things, our interests help define our self-concept. But also that they're spending a lot of time thinking about their identity.
They are.
Where do I belong? What group am I a part of, right? In my family, in my
Mhm.
friends, in my activities.
Mm.
So this idea of identity is a
Yes,
huge part of teen development. And it's worth mentioning that, sometimes we joke about the teen years, but sometimes it's big, hard questions
it
as
is.
parents, right?
Yes.
And part of that is related to, I know this identity thing is happening, which means our kids can be prone to like mental health risks and
Mhm.
things like suicidal thoughts and things like eating disorders. And those are like big, hard, scary questions
They are.
um, as
Absolutely.
parents. Yes.
They are.
And
Absolutely. And questions that we need to be brave enough to ask,
yes.
especially if we have concerns about, what's happening socially and how those social experiences may be impacting their own personal thoughts and feelings.
Yes, belonging in this
Mhm.
idea of identity. Some of the other episodes we've done, we've talked a little about adolescent identity or adolescent
Mhm.
belonging. As you think about rituals and routines and, the social groups. And because identity is so important to what's going on with them, the impact of social interactions is huge. And that feeling of
Mhm.
I belong or I don't. And so we
Absolutely.
do want to like take a moment and recognize that like that's a big deal and
It
something
is.
big that we deal with. And it's a big part of that and identity development. A few
It
other
is.
things about our teens and that social development, we start to see more mixed gender groups and friend groups. We, of course, that helps us with an interest in dating and all of that goes on in the teen years.
Yes.
That could be its own episode someday.
Yes,
uh,
absolutely. Dating is differently. It is no longer, 2 hours or, 2 class
yes,
periods like it was
yes.
in, preteen.
Yes. And then of course an increased time and focus spent on their friends and their peers.
Mhm.
And I always like to remind parents of teenagers just because your teen is spending more time with friends than they used to, or maybe, in 24 hours in a day, that might mean less time at home. That doesn't mean you're less important. Um,
Exactly.
and so those friend groups that's a big part of their, right? Their identity and their belonging.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. So that's all the domains, right?
Yeah,
And it really is 2.0, like
it is.
the language, we talk about language interaction
Mhm.
again and all that stuff. But
I know that
go ahead.
sometimes there's this idea that, teenagers are revisiting the toddler stage. And I think that as we walk through the domains, there is that. But at the same time, being respectful that, yes, it's their brain development that's bringing them back around to these next set of connections that are happening in the neurons. And yeah, some of them actually do look like toddlerhood revisited, but
Yes.
it's bigger and more important and involves many more people. So be patient.
Yes.
Their brains are still growing.
And I think, as you describe it that way, yeah, let's respect our teens enough to say like, yes, you're not a 2-year-old,
Mhm.
like, right?
Right.
You're not just being a toddler, or I know the word tantrum that used to set me off
Yes.
as a teen. Like, don't call this a tantrum.
Yes.
um, but I do think a big part of the similarity is the huge transition that's happening.
Mhm.
I think that's one of the reasons why it looks so similar. So much brain development, so much change and transition.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
From a baby to a kid, and then from a kid into adulthood.
Exactly. Scary
Ugh.
stuff,
Yeah, big stuff. But
right?
so for you, right, have and have had
Yeah.
teens, what stands out? Like walking through all of this, you've seen it in action and are
Mhm.
seeing it in your home right now. What stands out for teens?
So, 2 things very specifically stand out to me. 3 children, same household, 3 very different temperaments,
Mm.
3 very different teen years.
Mhm.
right? They're different. And so allowing yourself to parent each child differently becomes really important.
Yes.
It's okay to have a different curfew for child 1 than child 3. They're different. You are different. Their friends are different. And so sometimes we think of, oh, well, we have to be fair to child number 1 that is now 24 by having the curfew for child number 3 who is 16, be the same. Oh, well, do we really? I mean,
Yeah.
does child number 1 who's 24 really care that it was,
I'll say
9 for
other than the
her
fact that
and
they'll call you out on it.
yeah, yeah, and I'm okay with that. I'm totally fine with that. So just that idea
Oh.
of recognizing that each child that goes through these teen years is different.
Mm.
And secondly, that as your child goes through their teen years, they are not going through the same teen years that you did. And
Mm.
so I found myself with child 1 and 2, and now with child 3, constantly reminding myself that this is their teen experience. This is not Lori's revisited teen experience. Just because Lori was apprehensive about this particular situation as a teenager does not mean that Leah will be apprehensive about
Mm.
this kind of situation as a teenager. And so
Mm.
it became very important to keep reminding myself, A, I can make different rules and have different situations, different expectations, but B, I cannot try to make my child fix something through
Mm.
their teen experience that didn't go well in mine. And
Yes.
so those two very different but similar things. This is their teen experience, not
Yes.
mine.
And I remember you talking about that in our bonus episode on rituals, on
Mm,
like, it doesn't need to look for them the way it looked for me. Like, they're gonna take
exactly.
different meaning. Um,
Exactly.
and I think, even our question last week related to like preteens and like technology and
Mhm.
like, yeah, that was not my teen experience. And it can be my child's. Like, and that can be okay. It doesn't make one good or bad.
Exactly.
Mm.
Exactly. And again, the difference in age between child number 1 and child number 3 is 7.5 years. So
Yeah.
a lot changes in 7.5 years. And for me to have, this rigid line drawn, well, I'm going to have these same rules. That just, that feels like maybe I'm not respecting the individuality in each of my 3 children,
Yes. That makes total sense.
which kind of
So
leads us into our parenting conversation, right?
it really
Right?
does.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, Science of Parenting
Yes.
podcast that we're talking about how we parent teens, not just the changes they're going through, but how that affects
Right.
what we do and how we interact with them. And so
Mhm.
again, we get one more one-liner from Dr. Diana Lang, who's an ISU professor with an open access book called Parenting in Diverse Contexts. We
Mhm.
loved getting to partner with her for this. And so her one-liner for parenting teens, are you ready? We're going to change our strategies to foster more autonomy or independence,
Mhm.
more self regulation, and more responsibility, while guiding teens' safety and positive decision making skills.
I love it. Mm, I love it. Changing your strategies. Ding, 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 ding. It is
Mm,
okay to change your strategies. This open source textbook says so. Research
yes.
says it's okay to change your strategies. Yes.
Mm,
And Ellen Galinsky, we started talking about her at the
yes.
beginning as well. And she refers to this stage as interdependent. So that slides right in there that you're changing your strategies while guiding them, working together with them interdependently. And
Mhm.
so I love those two together to remind us there is more than one way to raise great kids.
Mm, sure is.
There is.
Yes. And I
Yes.
love that. I love listing those three of like, what are we changing our strategies to foster? Independence or
Yes.
autonomy, self regulation, responsibility. Like, absolutely. The teen years are those things. Like,
Mhm.
we're encouraging those things. And that's like, okay, but we're not like tossing them to the world to do that. We're
No.
also guiding them to help keep them safe and help them make good decisions.
Ooh, that
Yes.
sounds
Yes, we
like
are.
the RPM 3.
It kind of is, right? All of last season,
Yes.
I got to like geek out about that whole parenting model. And
Mhm.
it comes right back around. It's fostering these things. We teach them, we mentor them, we
Mhm.
model it for. I mean, I think maybe
Yeah.
I'm gonna say some of these words again in a few minutes when we go over the positive
Yeah, let's
parenting
go to
tips.
strategies. Let's go to strategies.
Yes. So again, tapping into some great expertise from the CDC on positive parenting tips, but like practical ones, right? We're focused on in your own reality. All right, I learned
Exactly.
this stuff about teens. What am I gonna do about that? So
Exactly.
a few of them for you here. One is being available and responsive caregiver to listen to their experiences. So
Mhm.
there's that word respond.
Respond.
Right? We want to be responsive to our kids. And right, like we said, it feels big to them when things are
It
going on.
does.
And so listening and connecting with them is an important part of it. The second one is to serve as a model of responsible behavior. There's that M.
M.
Yes. But we know, I mean, we always said like our toddlers and our young kids were sponges, they're soaking it up.
Mhm.
Our teenagers are too. If we are inconsistent in our words and our actions, they're picking up on that. And so that modeling, um, and who used the phrase the other day? One of our colleagues was talking about someone who she'd heard say this in a class that a lot more is caught
Mm.
than taught,
Yes. Yes.
especially in our teen years. And then the other one that I wanted to mention was that we're going to continue this process of monitoring, another M from that parenting model last season, but we're going to continue monitoring, enforcing safety rules, and accepting and supporting their individuality and independence. But we're still, they're not out in the world yet. We're still helping them make good decisions. Their brain's not usually ready for them to be out in the world all by themselves yet. So,
Exactly. And the idea behind all of this is guiding them along the way because,
yes.
as Barb Dunn Swanson says, sometimes, not always, they're going to make the right decision, and we have to be supportive when they don't. And
Yes.
I think that as we walk through these strategies, there are going to be moments where I remind myself, "Oof, I remember that time. Oof, they remember that time," right? So a couple of other strategies: communicating information and values, helping them to
Mm,
remember our family's values so they can stand on those as they make important decisions on their own. As we make decisions together, we stand on
mm,
our family values.
yes.
And serving kind of almost as a consultant as they make important
Ooh.
decisions. Now, that might feel uncomfortable to some of us as parents, becoming the consultant and
Mhm.
not the final decision maker in some cases, right?
Yep.
But really allowing for those conversations to happen around why your teen wants to make the decision this way. How did they come to that, decision process? What did they think about along the way? You're the consultant, and maybe you ask a few more questions that they think about. And
Mhm.
then allowing them to separate from you with an atmosphere of acceptance. So I know that you are going to be launched off on your own, and I accept who you are, who you've
Mm.
become. I accept your decisions, the processes with which you make decisions. I accept you. I may not always like the outcomes, but I accept you as a human being, part of my family. And that piece of
Yes.
acceptance is really important as they stumble and fall, as they
Totally.
have successes. And so, I love that strategy of acceptance.
Yes. And I think, as we think back on like the mental health, and we do see,
Mhm.
mental health risks in this adolescent teen years.
Yes.
And so I think about that protective factor that it becomes that your kids
Mhm.
know, like, what is the thing about their identity and belonging? Like, I belong here. Like, I belong.
Yes.
I might make me cry a little bit.
Yeah.
Like, but I do, like, I belong in my family. My family loves me. They want me here. They
Mhm.
accept, even if I feel like the dark horse or feel like the
Yes,
odd duck, that, like, no, I belong here and I'm accepted and loved,
I am.
even when it's hard other places.
Absolutely.
Yes. And honestly, all of that, listening to those tips, I kind of want to add one of my own.
Okay. Let's hear
So
it.
yeah, I honestly think of finding this balance between like risk and consequences for our teens.
Yes.
That they get the chance to take some risk, that they get
Mhm.
the chance to make some of their own decisions, and then helping find appropriate I mean, sometimes, right? Sometimes they're the logical consequences that we choose, and sometimes
Yes,
it's letting them experiences the consequence of their choices. And
absolutely.
so, and yeah, I mean, I wish it was like this is how you choose this balance, and this is how you choose this balance. But again, like every teen, every family is
Mhm.
different. Like the resources in your family, the situation in your reality, but that balance, I think, just is really important. Of take some risk. Like, we don't want to
Mhm.
say you could never on all the fronts, because that can actually encourage them to be like, no, I'll show you.
Exactly, exactly. I love that one.
Mhm.
I love that idea of creating that balance. Sometimes I think about, does the consequence match the infraction?
Yes.
We talked about that in the toddler years, or even in the
Yes.
preschool years. Like, does the consequence match, what was the misbehavior? And I think that's really important to consider. Again, as individual children, there
Yes.
should be different consequences for individual children. They're all different.
Mhm.
you know, each child has different things that are meaningful to them. So we have to really think about, what is a meaningful consequence for the
Yes.
infraction. And you can't have the same consequence for three children, because one child actually could care less if
Yes.
you took this away and gave this consequence, right?
Yes.
So that's a
Mm.
great addition.
Yes. All right. Well, and then of course we want to point you in the direction of more information. And so we actually have a great resource from Iowa State University Extension Outreach called Living with Your Teenager. It's basically like a set of little newsletters, publications, just to scope out some more research-based information on parenting your teen. That resource, as well as other resources you can find on our scienceofparenting.org webpage. And along that kind of right hand side, a little bit low on that right hand side, you can see this box of ages and stages, and click into that teen one. You'll find this publication written by Dr. Kim Greeter, who's our fabulous colleague, but just other great information about parenting your teens and preteens too.
Yes.
Mhm.
So let's bring in our producer. This kind of brings us to our stop, breathe, talk time. And it's that time where we, as co hosts, kind of take a pause and allow our producer, Mackenzie DeYoung, to come in and help us think about our flagship strategy of stopping, taking a breath, allowing us to speak with intention, and think about our interactions with children. Hey,
Definitely.
Kens.
Hello.
Hi.
Hey. So I got a request from Barb Dunn Swanson herself to talk more about connecting that idea of where kids are at in brain development and those, that guidance for teens and the consequences for teens. We've
Mhm.
talked about guidance, positive discipline in our bonus episode. We've talked about it throughout, but to talk more about that related to teens specifically. So this is my and go.
And
All right.
go.
And go.
Um,
Mm.
okay,
Okay.
so I have
I'm
one
like,
word.
wait.
I have one word, and that is currency. So when
Oh.
we guide our teens and the consequences, we really have to figure out the currency. What is their currency?
Mm.
What is meaningful to them, and how can we bring that into the way that we guide them through consequences um,
Oh.
and misbehaviors?
Oh, I like that word. I assumed your word was
Currency.
going to be respect.
I know. Well, that too.
That's a
Yes.
word too.
Yes. Each child's currency is different.
Yes. And I think of, we're like we said in our bonus episode, between these last few seasons on positive discipline, it's really about teaching.
It
Guiding
is.
our teens is about teaching them skills. And so sometimes that is with a logical consequence that we add in. Um, but I think, yeah, thinking about it specifically in terms of brain development,
Mhm.
keeping that frame in mind. I think of, I don't think we've talked about it in a while, but like the behavior reaction cycle
Mm.
between parents and
Oh.
kids. But this idea that like our brain, something happens, our brain has a reaction, and then
Mhm.
we respond. Like we
Mhm.
have a behavior, and that goes around, and then it goes to our child, and they get a turn, and then we get a turn. And
Mhm.
sometimes that spiral goes upwards, and sometimes it quickly goes down.
It does.
But as I think about that brain development with teens, that their brain's not there yet. Like Lori's so good at reminding us, like, but ours is. Like,
It is.
we have a fully developed adult brain, which means it ultimately kind of lands on us to
Mhm.
break that cycle or to determine the direction of it, because we have more skills, abilities, and more brain power, literally,
Yes.
to, to stop, take a breath, right? Regulate
Mhm.
our bodies and all of those things. We have a more developed prefrontal cortex that helps us regulate.
Mhm.
And then talking, and then saying, shared discussions and open conversation. And yeah, we're the adult. We're the
We
adult.
are. And I think that when we step into those stop, breathe, talk moments, we can speak more respectfully to our child. They see us speaking respectfully, hear us. Here we go in the cycle, right? They then may choose to speak respectfully. They may choose to take a breath like we do. And so we're modeling the behavior of disagreeing with each other, of talking through difficult conversations. I think that as the adult who has the brain cells and neurons and connections all complete at this time, it's also our responsibility to not only be respectful, but it's our responsibility to figure out a way to help the child find a win somewhere. And what
Yeah.
I mean by that is sometimes the consequence may be a really big consequence. And maybe it's for a long period of time.
Mm.
And when we look at that long period of time, how can we help our child have some wins, some smaller wins in that window of time while they're still accepting that large consequence? So a concrete example of this might be, um, my child was late coming home and she didn't communicate. So she had the consequence of then not being able to go out on a kind of a big deal trip that her and her friends had already planned for the
Yes.
following day. And this big deal trip was actually kind of for someone else. So it was kind of a celebratory experience for someone else.
Mm.
And so the consequence was, guess what? Now you don't get to have this really special moment with all your friends. And so she spent about 36 hours accepting that consequence. Her friends, they were accepting of the consequence. They were trying to decide if they were going to go. She was very respectful during this time. And so about the time I knew the friends were going to start leaving, I sent them a message and I said, hey, why don't you all come over here and let's have a conversation? And so they came over and they were wondering, oh boy, what, I mean, we didn't do anything
Mama
wrong.
Lori.
We had nothing to do with her being late. And, she's wondering, oh my gosh, what are my friends doing here? And I said, here's the deal. Yep. She was late. She should have communicated. Because she didn't, now your plans are ruined and you all had nothing to do with it. So I'm willing to make a concession. I'm willing to think about different consequences for her to kind of carry out her sentence. But I'm also willing to let her go with you all, since you all did nothing and she was the one that, made the error. So here's what we're going to do. You all are going to come up with her new consequence.
Mm.
I mean, I have to tell you, what they came up with was way more than what I would have come up with. And she accepted their consequence. The next day she served out her sentence. She got to go with them. But that is an example of helping the child find a win somewhere in. I didn't want her to have to wallow for another 48 hours in this idea that I stink. I'm so bad as a teenager that I've ruined not only my last 36 hours, but now I'm about to ruin my friends' 24 hours. And those are the real raw emotions that they think, right? This isn't just mom being over dramatic. Like, that's what goes through their head, those words. And we don't want them to continue to say those words, for another week, for 30 days, for however long that consequence is. How can we help them find some wins in between the serving of their consequence.
Yes. And I think what you said earlier about matching the consequence with the infraction, it sounds like that was the case where it was like, okay, but this consequence is almost too big.
Yeah.
That you're
Yeah.
like, I'm taking away from other people and taking, this big experience. And yeah, like there's other ways to match.
Yeah.
And I think
friends only turn 16 once.
yes.
Right?
Yes. Well, and then also this idea of like reason-based consequences, that it's not like a flippant, you're right. We're stopping, we're breathing, we're talking, we're thinking.
Yes.
And that like, there's a reason why this is the consequence I've given you, because discipline and guidance is about teaching, right? This is about teaching. Well, I don't know what to do. Like, I don't know how to trust you when this keeps happening.
Exactly.
And that open conversation and using those natural and logical consequences, that it's not always the same consequence for everything that goes wrong, right?
Exactly.
Because it's about teaching.
It is.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, when she was going to be maybe, 5 minutes before curfew next time, I was getting texts about, I'm coming, I'm on my way. I don't think that child's been late for 6 months. And so that's a win. Like, that's a win. I didn't cave on the consequence.
No.
I changed the direction of the consequence. And boy, like I said, her friends came up with way better consequences than I could. They were serious about their job now as the consequence maker.
Yes. And I think doing that without shame, like,
yes,
that you give yourself the grace to say, you know what, in that moment, this is what I decided. This is not actually what I want. Like, this is not how I think we can teach this best. Like,
yes.
And I love that. And then, that it's not a matter of like, we don't want to belittle our teen, right? To teach them, it's like, you know what, this happened and, that doesn't go with the expectations I have or that we share. And here we are.
There's no reason to make someone miserable for 72 hours when they got it after the first 2, right?
Yes.
So how can we as the adult who has all of our brain connections together teach and guide in a way that shows them we actually are willing to be flexible. We're going to have flexible thinking, right?
Yes. Meaningful teaching, like flexible thinking and meaningful teaching with our guidance for our teens, for sure.
Yes.
Oh, I love listening to you talk about examples like that. Like, so good. Thanks, Kens.
Thank you. That wasn't so bad. That wasn't so bad.
Yeah. It was kind of a like heart-filled conversation about guiding.
No, yes. It is hard. And I think that's the message we give our teens is, I understand this is hard. Like, what can we do together to work through this? Because this is hard for me as your mama too.
Yes.
Right? Like, this is hard for me too. I've never grown you up before. I've grown your sisters up before, but I've never grown you up before.
Yes.
Yeah.
So good. And so we did, thinking about, we're talking about these teen years or adolescence is the more formal term that people tend to use, but there's lots of different development happening, the physical, their brain development going off again.
Oh,
and that thinking and the imaginary audience and the personal fable and all of those things. And I just love, we can kind of bring it all together with that idea of, we're going to have to adjust from when they were little. We're going to change our strategies, promote those things like responsibility and regulation and independence, but still alongside them, still guiding them with that decision making and helping make sure that they stay safe.
So thanks for joining us today on the Science of Parenting podcast. And remember to subscribe to our weekly audio podcast on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Watch the show on video each week and join us on Facebook or Twitter at Science of Parent and see our content in your feed.
Yes, please do come along with us as we tackle the ups and downs, the ins and outs, and the research and reality all around the science of parenting.
The Science of Parenting is hosted by Lori Kothals and Mackenzie Johnson, produced by Mackenzie DeYoung, with research and writing by Barbara Dunn Swanson. Send in questions and comments to parenting@iastate.edu and connect with us on Facebook and Twitter. This institution is an equal opportunity provider. For the full non-discrimination statement or accommodation inquiries, go to www.extension.iastate.edu/diversity/ext.